in my opinion, I don't think what we're actually seeing can be considered a revival, and what it actually could be considered is a awakening. And the two things are actually very different and very important. So if you don't see the church culture actually improving and people actually getting closer to God, becoming more like Christ, and you don't see the people who are showing up to church, the newly interested, actually giving their lives to God and saying, nope, I'm going to be a God person with everything I've got, then you can't say you had a revival. Welcome back to the Circle Dwellers podcast, production of the Protestant Monastic Order of Life Mission Fellowship. This is a show about living out the gospel in an intentional Christian community. My name is Matt Krell. I'm back here with my brother, Timothy Krell. And good evening to you, Tim.
Good evening, Matt.
So, Tim, I don't know if you've been seeing a lot of this sort of thing lately online or not, but it definitely seems like Charlie Kirk's passing has started something in the wider culture. I know, especially of that first week after he died, I kept seeing lots of videos of people saying, hey, I bought a Bible and I started going to church and things, and really shook a lot of people up. Well, one thing I found out recently is like there is a lot of numbers behind this, whatever is going on, which is like I think Breitbart said that like Bible sales just hit like 10 million copies, which was a jump of over 1 million compared to the previous year. Another person is saying that like they're seeing like a 15% increase at mass on different various Catholic churches and things. And I've seen various other posts from Christians saying that they've gotten bigger attendance at their churches and things. Like, have you been seeing stuff like that?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I've seen a lot in even the Orthodox space as well. A lot of people saying that attendance is definitely up, especially after the Charlie Kirk shooting and everything in the memorial. Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, a lot of people from the buzz I've been seeing online are saying like, hey, we might be in the middle of a Christian revival going on. But what I wanted to talk about in this video, though, is why I think that label is probably incorrect. But we don't want to say anything negative about what's happening. Obviously, we're very happy that people are moving towards Christ. But in my opinion, I don't think what we're actually seeing can be considered a revival. And what it actually could be considered is a awakening. And the two things are actually very different and very important difference. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this podcast episode.
Yeah, it does seem like the general narrative has been, or at least the term revival has definitely been tossed out there and spread around a bit, I suppose. I think that's definitely what I've seen going on. Yeah, but why? What's your thinking of why it isn't a revival, or why it?
The reason is there's really two reasons. The one reason is that we ourselves, Life Mission Fellowship, actually got started because of a revival. You can actually go watch our video explaining our origins and such. It's on the different episode of the podcast. So we have a bit of firsthand experience about what it actually means. And then secondly, it doesn't actually fit Charles Finney's definition of a revival. And the reason I think that's important is because Finney, if you don't know your church history, was probably the most successful revivalist of the modern era. If you don't know who he was a lawyer in New England who got converted over the course of a few years. And then he became one of the leaders of the Second Great Awakening that was happening throughout that time. I don't have the specific stats on this, so if I can get the sources, I'll add them in the description of this video. But people have traced the different revivals he started and the people he converted through his ministry. They've basically followed back up with these people to find out like how well they stuck to the faith. They then compared it to other revivalists that are extremely well known, like Billy Graham, for example. Of the people who continued in the faith after like 10 years or so, I'm not sure exactly what the time frame was. Billy Graham got like, I think 10%, something like that. Modern evangelists, they get like less than 1%. But Finney had a success rate of 90%. Like it was phenomenally successful from a numbers perspective.
And when we're talking 90% success rate, what do you know what like specifically that's referring to? Like what equals a success in that?
That that the person was still identifying as a Christian and continuing Christian virtues like 20 years or 10 years or something like that after the initial conversion experience.
Right.
So again, I don't have the specific numbers. I do know they're out there. I took a very little bit of research to try to find them. I couldn't. So, but I do know it exists. So
yeah, in general, the stickiness of Finney's converts was much, much higher than a lot of the mainstream and the other evangelists at the time. Yeah.
Which is interesting because Finney is often rather controversial in certain theological circles, but that may also be because he got something right and we kind of don't want to admit it. So anyway, Finney has a very specific definition of what a revival is. And as someone who's extremely successful,
maybe like, yeah, before we get into that, like, what do you think, or what's your feeling on what people mean by that there's like a Christian revival happening, like around, the whole Charlie Kirk thing, and like, what's what you've seen? What's your gut feeling of like, what do you think people mean when they're kind of saying that?
I think probably the broadest definition would be a lot of people are moving towards the faith in some capacity or doing the things that are kind of vaguely Christian. So if a lot of people are starting to read their Bible, then that would be a revival. If a lot of people are starting to show up at church, that would be a revival. And I leave that so intentionally broad because I think most people's definition of it would be intentionally broad.
Yeah, because it seems like when people are saying there's sort of a revival going on, they mean that more people are going to church than normally would, and maybe they mean that there's more like interest in Christianity, like more people wanting to find out more about it, I suppose. Because it does seem more like when people are talking about that, they're generally noting a increase in interest and an increase in attendance. Not necessarily an increase in people explicitly converting, I think.
Right.
But yeah. I don't know if there's anything else
exactly. That's kind of my feeling as well. Like, and any sort of large amount of movement towards the faith would be, oh, we're in the midst of a revival. That's the kind of the natural thought. But that's not how Finney defines it. How Finney defines a revival, and this is a quote from his book, Revival Lectures, which is in the public domain. So if you want to read it, you can go find it very easily. His definition is a revival consists in the return of the church from her backslidings and in the conversion of sinners. And period, stop. So if you think about that very carefully, what that means then is that people moving towards the faith or being interested in the Bible, that's all good, but it doesn't actually constitute a revival because no conversion is actually happening or taking place. These people, they're still living for themselves, ultimately. They're just interested in Christianity for whatever reason. And similarly, the church itself is not changing from its backslidings and learning to actually live according to the Sermon on the Mount. So if you don't see the church culture actually improving and people actually getting closer to God, becoming more like Christ, and you don't see the people who are showing up to church, the newly interested, actually giving their lives to God and saying, nope, I'm going to be a God person with everything I've got, then you can't say you had a revival. That's just a renewed interest at the Spirit moving, like that. You see what I mean? It's just the Spirit moving. That's an awakening, right? People are becoming aware of the issues that Christianity talks about, but that doesn't mean they're actually giving their lives to Christ.
I do wonder too. I mean, there's sort of a little bit of a different social context in that in Finney's day, it was sort of assumed that everybody was a Christian.
Right.
I think a little bit more than what it is now. Whereas there's I think it's safe to say there's a much larger portion of the population now that just hasn't even like grown up with much of a Christian influence at all. Like very, the secularization of our culture is a lot higher. So I don't know. I haven't really thought that much about it, but I don't know how that like skews with the definition of like, the revival of Christians necessarily. Like when you have a large population now that doesn't even have that Christian basis to return to necessarily. That does seem to change the dynamics a little bit, but I mean, at the very least, I think even in that context, the important point is that a revival should involves, a full conversion to the faith, not necessarily just a dipping your toes in or going and visiting the church a few times or whatever, or participating in that way. So I think that can kind of muddy the waters a little bit now too, especially as it's there. You also, it can be kind of confusing because you don't have necessarily that shared cultural idea that our identity is Christians, in our, just in the broad culture of our country and everything,
Right. On the other hand, though, I mean, I feel like it could be somewhat similar back then, because what people even say a Christian is today is not really truthful to what a Christian is. You can sometimes hear random people on podcasts who are living like complete secularists and not thinking about Christ, not like living for other people at all. And they're saying, well, I'm a Christian because like, I believe in God, or I show up to church every once in a while. Right. Well, no, that's not being a Christian. Being a Christian means that you are a disciple of Jesus and you're following him with everything you've got, being fully committed to Christ and his work and his people. Right. Like that's what being a Christian means. And it's a literal change of heart. You stop living for yourself and start living all for God, which is what Finney was trying to get people to do too. For him, like the term Christian in his culture, I think would be more, I'm going to say legal, although that's not quite right. In the sense of like, oh, you were baptized, right? So it's the kind of a Christendom perspective of a Christian, right? This is someone who grew up in America, he was baptized and such. So, and he's part of a Christian nation like America. So, therefore he's a Christian as opposed to like a Muslim, right? But there's that distinction we make where are you a true Christian, right? For nowadays, it's a little easier to make that distinction because secularism is so assumed. But on the other hand, what people think being a Christian means is so watered down that you have to break through that barrier as well. So in one sense, I don't even know if it really is all that different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, but the thing that also makes things difficult, I think, is just in the church. There's just the sense of what it means to be the church is so watered down from, you know, what it was in the early church. And I think even like in Finney's day, it probably still wasn't even necessarily as close to what we would consider, you know, being fully the church. Um, but at least in Finney's day, you know, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have, you know, much broader travel and modern, very independent, able to mobilize and move around very easily. So you at least there was a lot more sense of place in your local community, and being part of that community meant something. Whereas now it's, you know, your online community is much more important than your local community for a lot of people. They feel a lot more connection with that. You don't aren't really connected strongly to just the people in your local area, let alone, you know, or even your church and different things like that, where it's more like these are just services that I can use, or I can pick up and move and get the same kind of services over here, right? And church is just one of those kind of services that I can get for a lot of people, you know. So when you have people who are being awakened and interested in this, but really like the revival has to happen at the church level currently, because there's just what the sense of becoming a Christian isn't just about your own internal loyalties. It obviously is a lot of that too, but it has to do with joining the body of Christ. And that's a much more significant thing than, than simply, attending the church services every so often, you know? So yeah, like for a revival to really, for there to really be a revival, you should be people making significant commitments to the fellowship of believers as well, you know. And one thing that does, you know, is like, especially with Catholics and Orthodox, they have a pretty rigorous, structure of what it, what it means to become, to be a seeker and to learn, and then to fully commit and get baptized and everything. And some Protestants have that too, but it can be a little bit looser. But even still, with some of those, it does feel like
you're joining
ancillary, like what, it's not significant what church you join. I'm not talking about denomination, but like, just like, that's the one where, I might get a new job and move and go somewhere else, and then that will be where my church is, and there's even a lot of public thinkers and everything where I just don't hear them talk about that aspect of it very often. You'll hear a little bit.
I don't think they believe it. I don't think they think that's what the church is.
Yeah, I think some of them, some definitely have a more sense of that community is important, but it's just not a topic that you actually hear people pushing much at all, or like, it doesn't, the people's church and the body that they're a part of, you don't get the sense that gives them their identity, part of who they are. Right. And that's the significant portion, right? That's what, needs to be, the most important part of a revival, is that people, make a commitment to Christ, but also, to his church, and, coming into that. But one of the difficulties is it doesn't seem a lot of the broad church has any sense of what that is, or a way to make that be significant for people to be able to take that step.
Right. It's kind of like a fan club for Jesus more than an actual new family.
Yeah, or I wouldn't even put it like a fan club for Jesus, but like more like a a gym membership, or it's
Yeah,
a
like it.
self-help,
Yeah,
here's how you
exactly.
can make your life better kind of thing. um that's very broad too, and I would say more on the Protestant side where you get some of that. um but even still, it's you know even in some of the more high church traditions, it's just still about, this is the thing that you go to that makes your life better,
Right. Well, that's
rather
because
than
their
these are the
perspective on
people
self.
that you join and change your identity to.
Well, part of the reason for that, I think, is because they understand salvation as being these things that you do, right? These like sacraments you check off or whatever. And that's a vast oversimplification of certain theological traditions. So I'm not trying to reduce things, but if you try to hit brass tacks on these things, it doesn't actually mean learning to become like Jesus. And
Yeah.
the way you learn to become like Jesus by, rubbing shoulders and poking each other with your porcupine spines with other Christians, right? Like that's the only way it happens, right? So it's hard for me to say that the church that people are often showing up is really acting like a church. And so again, that's like another reason why I don't really think this is a revival, because I don't see the church actually doing its job of being a new family in Christ. It's more just a giant self-help club.
Yeah.
So I suppose like Finney does have a number of like pretty specific criteria that you can use to measure this. One is the conviction of sin on the part of backsliding professors, right? So if people who say they're Christians but they're not acting like Christians are getting convicted of sin, okay, good. So that's
Professors here means people who profess to be Christians,
profess to be Christians, right? Yeah,
not
if they're
people who
not
teach
being,
at colleges.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like, hey, yeah, exactly. Um, Second option is repentance expressed by backsliding Christians. Wait, that's the same thing. I have to check my notes here. That seems like the same item. Oh yeah, well,
I wonder. I
repentance,
think
right?
I forget what the context. It might Professors might be more specific, like leaders, like actual
Oh, right. He may be using
pastors.
the word differently. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, because he there is that old 1800s English,
yeah.
the way.
Needless to say, this is late 1800s. It's Second Great Awakening. So yeah, sometimes the way he puts things is a little odd to our modern ears. Third option was renewal of faith on the part of backslidden Christians. Um, so if you don't have a lot of trust in what God is actually doing in the world, then yeah, that means you're just coasting through life and you're dry and not on fire for the Lord. For the power of sin and the world is broken over Christians. So if you see people actually changing, like they're solving their problems with addictions, they're actually donating their money now, and they're actually thinking about what's the person sitting next to them in the pews needs, and they're actually overcoming the different vices and bad habits that they have. Well, good, that's great, because that means the power of God is actually moving, and we can say that's a revival. And then the fifth option would be the reformation and salvation of sinners will follow. That's the next thing. Because if Christians start actually acting like Christians, inevitably people become attracted to that and become convicted by that. So there's a kind of interesting paradox here, where the solution is not to go out and start preaching to sinners, it's to get yourself right, it's to get the church right. And when the church starts doing things correctly, that's actually what leads other people to Christ.
Yeah, most definitely.
So anyway, nice, relatively short episode, but I think I would, to sort of wrap it up on a conclusion, I would say we wouldn't tell anyone to turn someone away because, oh, you're not really a Christian, you shouldn't be here. No, I wouldn't say that. If someone's curious about the faith, yeah, welcome them in for sure. But what we would say to people is have your congregation start self-examining. Finney actually outlines how to do this and to start a revival in his book on revival lectures. In fact, we're going to do that next on the podcast, so feel free to hit subscribe to find out when that happens. But yeah, basically the technique's very simple. Is you basically just outline all the different things that you did in life, all the different sins you committed, and through that list that you create, God actually starts speaking to you and showing you what you need to do now. And it's kind of like magic, but it really does actually work. So yeah, we would tell congregations just start doing that, and you will have the revival you need and the power that you need to help the new Christians who are coming in, new people who are curious about the faith coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's really encouraging to see so many people being interested in the faith and moving towards it. But I think at the same time, you want to keep enticing them and drawing them in more, not just be like, oh, yay, they came to service. They're a Christian now. Like, really keep drawing and keep encouraging in that direction, but don't just be satisfied with the shallow thing.
Yeah, like Aslan says in the last battle, higher up and further in, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, Tim, the other day we had a really cool podcast episode about Tom Holland's Dominion, and I'm happy to report we got quite a few views from that, which was I'm very pleased to see. Quite a few by our standards of our tiny podcast here. But anyway, what's really so cool, I find cool about that is it is actually related to what's happening now, because Tom Holland was a secular historian who was interested in the ancient world, and as he started studying these things, he realized, wait a minute, everything I believe about equality and love and justice, that all comes from Christianity. And so even though he's not a Christian, he's like very respectful of the faith in a way that a lot of secularists are definitely not. Like most people would sort of want to believe the Enlightenment was the source of their beliefs, but Holland is very clear. Nope, it's Christianity. And he's unabashedly clear on that point. What he personally believes, he doesn't often talk about, but nonetheless, it is a very interesting case that he makes. And so it's a really great book.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
All right. So anyway, we'll see you guys over there, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for your attention, everyone. God bless.